Adebayo was a wealthy and respected man, known for his success and kindness. When he married Zainab, a kind-hearted but poor village girl, many were surprised by his choice. Zainab was gentle, loving, and full of warmth, but she came from a humble background, which did not sit well with Adebayo's mother, Mama Ebun. From the moment Zainab stepped into their grand home, Mama Ebun despised her. She believed Zainab was beneath them, an outsider who did not deserve to be part of their prestigious family. What should have been a joyful beginning for Zainab quickly turned into a silent battle. Even on the wedding day, Mama Ebun made her disapproval clear with cold stares and forced smiles. While Adebayo was deeply in love and excited for their future, his mother's hatred lingered like a dark cloud over the new bride. The tension between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law only grew, and Zainab soon realized that her life in this new home would not be easy. Life became unbearable for Zainab in her new home. Mama Ebun did everything in her power to make her miserable. She would insult Zainab at every chance, mocking her background and calling her unworthy of Adebayo. In front of guests, she would act polite, but behind closed doors, she treated Zainab like a servant rather than a daughter-in-law. She refused to let her eat at the family table and would assign her the hardest chores, hoping to break her spirit. As time passed, Mama Ebun's hatred grew stronger. She started spreading terrible lies about Zainab, telling the villagers that she was a witch who had brought bad luck to their family. She blamed her for every little misfortune, from a broken pot to a delayed business deal. Whispers of these rumors spread quickly, and soon people in the village began to look at Zainab with suspicion. Some avoided her, while others whispered behind her back. Through it all, Adebayo remained blind to his mother's cruelty. He loved Zainab, but he also deeply respected his mother. Whenever Zainab tried to tell him about the insults and mistreatment, he brushed it off, believing his mother was simply strict and would eventually accept her. He could not see the pain in his wife's eyes, or hear the silent cries in her heart. With no one to defend her, Zainab felt alone, trapped in a home that no longer felt like hers. One stormy night, when the wind howled through the trees and rain poured heavily from the sky, Mama Ebun made a terrifying decision. Zainab had to die. Her hatred had consumed her completely, and she believed that only by getting rid of Zainab could she cleanse her family of the curse she had convinced herself was real. She called upon a group of men from the village, men who were willing to do anything for the right price. In hushed whispers, she told them what she wanted. They were to take Zainab far away and make sure she never returned. The men hesitated at first, but the promise of gold silenced their doubts. Zainab had no idea of the danger creeping toward her. She sat alone in her room, staring out of the window at the dark sky, listening to the sound of thunder. She felt a deep sadness in her heart, as if something terrible was about to happen. Before she could process the feeling, the door burst open, and rough hands grabbed her. She tried to scream, but a dirty cloth was stuffed into her mouth, muffling her voice. Strong arms held her down as they tied her hands and feet with thick rope. Fear clutched her chest. Who were these men? Why were they doing this? But deep inside, she already knew the answer. Mama Ebun. The men carried her out of the house like a sack of grain. The rain lashed against her face, mixing with her tears as they dragged her into the darkness. The village was asleep, unaware of the horror unfolding in the night. They walked for what felt like hours, their heavy footsteps sinking into the muddy ground. Zainab struggled, trying to loosen the ropes, but they were too tight. She wanted to scream, to call out for help, but the storm covered every sound. Finally, they reached a clearing deep in the forest, a place where no one would hear her cries. There, in the middle of the clearing, was a deep pit, dark and endless. Zainab's body froze as she realized what was about to happen. She shook her head wildly, pleading with her eyes, but the men showed no mercy. One of them pushed her forward, and she tumbled into the pit, landing hard on the damp earth below. Pain shot through her body, but she barely noticed. She looked up at the circle of shadowy faces staring down at her. Then, to her horror, they picked up their shovels. "No, please don't do this," she screamed, her voice raw with fear. But the rain swallowed her words, and the men did not stop. One by one, they shoveled dirt into the pit. At first, it was just a few drops of soil hitting her skin, but soon, the weight of the earth grew heavier. She tried to move, to push the dirt away, But with her hands tied, she was helpless. The soil reached her waist, then her chest. Her breaths came in short gasps as she realized she was running out of time. "I don't want to die! Adebayo, help me!" she screamed one last time, but no one heard her. The dirt covered her face, filling her mouth, her nose. Darkness swallowed her, and the world above disappeared. The last thing she felt was the crushing weight of the earth pressing down, stealing the air from her lungs. Then, everything went silent. Darkness surrounded Zainab. The weight of the soil pressed against her chest, making it almost impossible to breathe. She felt trapped, lost in a grave that had been forced upon her. Her lungs burned as she fought to take in air, but the dirt covered her mouth and nose, choking her. Just when she thought all hope was lost, a tiny pocket of air remained near her face. She turned her head slightly, struggling to suck in whatever little oxygen she could find. She was buried, but she was not dead. Not yet. Above her, the storm raged on. The rain fell in heavy drops, pounding the earth like drumbeats. At first, the soil was firm, holding her down like chains. But as more rain poured, it slowly began to soften. Zainab felt the dirt shift slightly around her. It was a small change, but it was enough to give her hope. Summoning every ounce of strength left in her weak body, she wiggled her fingers, then her wrists. The ropes that had bound her were loose now, soaked from the rain. With a painful twist, she freed one hand, then the other. Her entire body ached, but she could not afford to stop. She dug her fingers into the wet earth, clawing her way upward. Every movement sent sharp pain through her arms and legs, but she gritted her teeth and kept going. The mud made it difficult, pulling her back down like it wanted to keep her buried forever. But Zainab refused to die here. She thought of Adebayo, of the life she had dreamed of, and of Mama Ebun, the woman who had tried to kill her. That thought alone fueled her strength. After what felt like an eternity, her fingers finally broke through the surface. Cold air rushed in, filling her lungs with a painful but welcome relief. With a desperate push, she pulled herself up, her head emerging from the muddy grave. She gasped for breath, coughing out dirt and rainwater. Her body shook violently, exhausted and weak, but she forced herself to crawl out. The moment she was free, she collapsed onto the wet ground, panting heavily. The rain washed over her, cleaning the mud from her bruised and battered skin. Lying there in the storm, Zainab felt a mix of emotions: pain, shock, and heartbreak. She had been left to die by the very people who should have protected her. But she was alive. Somehow, she had survived the impossible. Slowly, she pushed herself up onto her knees, her body trembling. She looked toward the distant village, where Mama Ebun and Adebayo were, where everyone believed she was gone forever. A fire burned inside her chest, stronger than any pain she felt. She would not hide. She would not run. She would return, and she would make sure the truth was known. Mama Ebun had buried her, but she had risen again, and now she was ready to fight. The next morning, Adebayo woke up expecting to see Zainab, but she was nowhere in sight. He waited, thinking she might be in the kitchen or outside in the garden. But as time passed, a strange feeling settled in his chest. Something was wrong. He called for the servants and asked if they had seen her, but they all shook their heads. Panic started to creep in. Where could she be? Just as he was about to leave the house to search for her, Mama Ebun stepped in with a calm but serious expression. "Zainab is gone," she said, her voice filled with fake concern. "She ran away in the middle of the night. Maybe she finally realized she didn't belong here." Adebayo stared at his mother in disbelief. "That's not possible," he argued. "Zainab would never leave without telling me." But Mama Ebun simply sighed and shook her head. "You gave her everything, and yet she still left. Maybe she was never the good woman you thought she was." Adebayo refused to believe it. He rushed out of the house and began searching for his wife. He went to the marketplace, asking if anyone had seen her. He knocked on doors, hoping someone had news. He even went to the riverbank, a place she loved to visit, but there was no sign of her. As the hours passed, his worry deepened. If she had truly run away, why hadn't she taken anything with her? Her clothes, her jewelry, even her favorite scarf, everything was still in their room. It didn't make sense. Days turned into weeks, and Adebayo grew restless. The villagers whispered behind his back, repeating the same lies Mama Ebun had spread, that Zainab had abandoned him. His heart told him something was wrong, but each time he questioned it, Mama Ebun was there to comfort him with her sweet but poisonous words. "You have to move on, my son," she would say, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. She chose to leave. "We can't waste our lives waiting for someone who doesn't want to be found." But no matter how much his mother tried to manipulate him, Adebayo couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was being kept from him. Something terrible had happened to Zainab. He just didn't know what, and deep down, he feared that if he didn't find the truth soon, he might never see her again. Weeks had passed since Zainab disappeared. The village had moved on, believing she was gone forever. Some whispered that she had run away, while others thought something terrible had happened to her. But no one could have imagined the truth. One evening, as the sun was setting and the village prepared for nightfall, a figure appeared at the edge of the dusty road. She walked slowly, her steps heavy, her body weak. Her clothes were torn, stained with dried mud and blood. Her face was pale, covered in bruises and scratches. Her once bright eyes were now filled with something else. Rage. It was Zainab. She had returned. A woman carrying a basket of vegetables was the first to see her. She dropped the basket, her mouth open in shock. "It's her," she whispered. "Zainab, she's alive." More villagers turned, their eyes widening in disbelief. Children clung to their mothers, frightened by the sight of the wounded woman. Some of the elders shook their heads, murmuring prayers under their breath. "No, this is not possible," one of them said. "She was buried. She's supposed to be dead." As Zainab stepped into the village square, a heavy silence fell over the crowd. People moved aside, giving her space, too afraid to come close. Was she real? Or had her spirit returned to seek revenge? Then, from the large house at the center of the village, Mama Ebun stepped out, unaware of what was happening outside. She smiled, greeting the neighbors as she always did, pretending to be the kind and loving mother-in-law. But then, her eyes landed on Zainab. For a moment, Mama Ebun didn't move. Her face lost all color. Her hands began to shake. No, this is a trick," she stammered. Her heart pounded violently in her chest. The woman she had ordered to be buried alive was standing right in front of her. The world around her spun. Her legs gave way, and before anyone could react, she collapsed onto the ground in a dead faint. Adebayo had just stepped outside when he saw his mother fall. Confused, he rushed to her, but then his eyes followed the direction everyone else was staring. And there she was, his wife, the woman he had been searching for. The woman he had feared was lost forever. Zainab stood there covered in dirt and wounds, her gaze locked onto his. He felt his body freeze, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. "Zainab?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Zainab did not blink. She did not cry. She simply stood there, staring at the man who had once promised to protect her, the man who had failed her. The air was thick with tension, fear, and disbelief. And in that moment, one thing was certain. Zainab was back, and she was not the same woman they had once known. The village square was crowded. Everyone had gathered, their faces filled with shock and curiosity. News of Zainab's return had spread like wildfire. Some people still could not believe she was real. Others whispered that she was a spirit, back from the dead to punish those who had wronged her. But Zainab had not come to haunt anyone. She had come to reveal the truth. Standing in the middle of the square, Zainab lifted her bruised face and looked around at the villagers. Then, with a voice filled with pain and anger, she spoke. "I was buried alive," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a sharp knife. Gasps echoed around her. "Mama Ebun sent men to take me in the dead of night. They tied me up, dragged me to the forest, and threw me into a deep pit. Then they covered me with dirt, leaving me to die." Her voice shook with emotion, but her eyes burned with determination. "But I did not die," the crowd murmured in shock. People turned to look at Mama Ebun, who was still weak from fainting, but now stood with a stiff, cold expression. "Lies!" she spat, her voice trembling. "She is trying to ruin our family, my son. Don't listen to her." She turned to Adebayo, desperation in her eyes. "You know I would never do such a thing." But Adebayo did not move. He just stared at his wife, his face pale. The truth was sinking in. He had ignored Zainab's pain. He had believed his mother's lies. And now, he was facing the horrifying reality of what had been done to the woman he loved. The villagers grew restless. "If this is true, she must be punished," someone shouted. Others nodded, demanding answers. Mama Ibn shook her head, trying to keep her voice firm. "There is no proof. She has no witnesses." But just then, a voice came from the crowd. "That's not true." One of the men who had buried Zainab stepped forward, his hands shaking. He could no longer keep the secret. The weight of his crime had been eating him alive. "She's telling the truth," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Mama Ebon paid us to do it. She told us to get rid of her." The crowd exploded into chaos. People gasped, some screamed in horror. Mama Ebon stumbled back, her face twisted in disbelief. She tried to speak, but no words came out. The truth was out. Everyone knew. And now, there was no escape. Adebayo stood frozen, his heart pounding as the truth crashed down on him like a heavy storm. His mother, the woman he had trusted, the woman he had loved and obeyed all his life, had tried to kill his wife. He felt sick, his stomach twisting with guilt and shame. How had he been so blind? How had he ignored Zainab's pain, her cries for help? He had believed his mother's lies, and because of that, the woman he loved had suffered a terrible fate. Tears welled up in his eyes as he turned to Zainab. She stood before him, bruised, broken, but still strong. Her face was emotionless, her eyes empty. He took a step closer, his voice shaking. "Zainab," he whispered. She did not move. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." His voice cracked as tears streamed down his face. "Please forgive me." But Zainab did not answer. She simply stared at him, as if she were looking at a stranger. Adebayo's chest tightened. The woman who once loved him with all her heart was now too shattered to even speak to him. He had failed her, and he knew that no apology could erase the pain she had endured. Behind them, the villagers surrounded Mama Ibn. She was no longer the powerful and respected woman she once was. Now, she was just a mother exposed for her cruelty. She tried to fight, shaking her head wildly. "You cannot do this to me. I did everything for my son, for our family." But no one listened. The elders of the village stepped forward, their faces grim. "You have committed a terrible crime," one of them said. "You must answer for your actions." Two strong men grabbed her by the arms and began to drag her toward the village council's chambers. She kicked and screamed, calling out to Adebayo, "My son, help me! I did this for you!" But Adebayo did not move. He could not. He simply watched, his heart breaking into pieces. The mother he had loved had become his greatest betrayal, and the woman he had loved more than anything, he had lost her too. The village elders gathered under the old baobab tree, their faces stern as they discussed Mama Ebun's fate. The entire village stood around them, watching in silence. The truth was now known. Mama Ebun had tried to kill Zainab, and her wickedness had nearly gone unpunished. But now, justice had come. Mama Ebun knelt before the elders, her face pale, her hands trembling. She had spent years holding power over others, controlling her son and pretending to be a good woman. But now, all of that was gone. She was nothing but a disgraced mother, a criminal in the eyes of the people. "Please," she whispered. "I did what I thought was right. I was only protecting my son." One of the elders, a man with deep lines of wisdom on his face, shook his head. "A mother protects with love, not with evil," he said firmly. "You tried to kill an innocent woman. You have lied, manipulated, and spread wickedness in this village. For that, you can no longer stay here." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The punishment was clear. Mama Ebon was to be banished. She would no longer have a home, no longer be welcomed in the village she had once ruled with pride. Her lips trembled, and she turned desperately to Adebayo. "My son," she sobbed. "Please don't let them do this to me. I am your mother." Adebayo looked at her, his heart heavy with sorrow. Once, he had loved her more than anything. He had believed in her, trusted her. But now, he saw the truth. This woman had destroyed his happiness, nearly killed his wife, and filled his heart with lies. He took a deep breath and shook his head. "You are my mother," he said softly, his voice filled with pain. "But I cannot save you. You brought this upon yourself." Tears streamed down Mama Ebon's face as she realized she had lost everything, her home, her son, and her respect. The villagers stepped aside as she was led away, her cries echoing through the air. She had once been feared, but now she was just a lonely, broken woman walking toward an uncertain future. As she disappeared into the distance, the village let out a deep breath. Justice had been served. But for Adebayo and Zainab, the scars of the past would remain forever. The days after Mama Eben's banishment were quiet, but the wounds she left behind were deep. Zainab, though still bruised and weak, refused to be broken. She had faced death and survived. She had been betrayed, but still stood tall. She knew that she could not let her past define her future. At first, it was difficult. The memories of that terrible night haunted her. The feeling of the cold earth pressing against her. The fear of never seeing the sky again. It all came back in nightmares. But each morning, as the sun rose, she reminded herself that she was still alive. And because she had survived, she had a chance to start again. Adebayo, filled with regret, tried to be there for her. He brought her food, spoke to her softly, and begged for forgiveness. But Zainab could not forget how he had turned his back on her when she needed him most. She did not hate him, but she no longer saw him as the man she had once loved. Some wounds could not be healed with simple apologies. Instead of clinging to the past, Zainab focused on rebuilding her life. She moved to a small house on the edge of the village where she could find peace. She worked hard, using her strength and wisdom to create a new beginning. Over time, the villagers, who had once doubted her, came to admire her courage. They saw how she had risen from the ashes of her pain, stronger than ever before. As she walked through the village one evening, she saw a group of young girls playing in the dirt. They reminded her of herself, innocent, full of dreams. She smiled, knowing that her story would one day be told to them, not as a tragedy, but as a lesson that evil never wins, that truth always finds its way out. With the past behind her and the future ahead, Zainab knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a warrior, and no one would ever silence her again. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support more powerful stories. Your voice matters. Let's keep the conversation going.